everyone, welcome back to Olivia's Corner, where I, Olivia, tell you stories and we talk about stuff. Sorry for the strange backdrop, we are still in a corner. I made sure of that part for you. This is my quarantine recording in a different location than normal because I might have COVID, so hello. Today we are reading Chapter 2 of By Day and By Night by Olivia Wright. The chapter is called Questions. If you have no idea what's going on in this book so far, you probably haven't heard Chapter 1 or the intro, so I highly recommend listening to those before you tune into this one. If you've already listened to those, you'll know that we met the main character, Adelae Newman. We discovered some history about the city that she lives in called Decidian and the hero versus villain conflict that started 20 years ago. You learned that Adelae is married to the mayor. And if you listen to Chapter 1, you met Adelae Newman, her husband, and you met Bruce and Al, the two cronies that help her with her specific niche in the crime world. A little vulnerability moment. Reading and editing the Chapter 1 really made me realize how much of my own conflicts and issues I put into this character without realizing it. So that was fun and also kind of rough. Alright, well, let's get into what this whole thing is about, and I'm going to read you Chapter 2, Questions. Sunday mornings were reserved for sleeping in at the Newman house. Adelae awoke to the hum of the intro music for the local news station drifting in from down the hall. She ambled into the living room to join her husband, yawning and stretching, rubbing her eyes before taking her place on the couch where Varun pulled her in against his side. A bright, polished newscaster sat behind a mahogany desk with a stack of papers before them, talking loudly with an over-enthusiastic voice. This dangerous attack has caused tension and a surge in the police force's determination to put an end to these self-proclaimed villains. Their vigilante methods are putting lives at risk, and officials say that so far their targets, people in positions of power like our mayor, do not appear to be chosen in any particular order. No further leads have been uncovered in this case. In other news, Valador Orphanage received a very generous donation again last night. Here's Karen on site with Director Michelle. Karen? Thank you, Wendy. Well, folks, Director Michelle was pleasantly surprised to discover a large duffel bag filled with stacks of $100 bills, stashed by the back door after midnight last night. After the authorities made a brief investigation, concluding that the connection between the robbery last night at import banks and the money donated anonymously could not be confirmed, the orphanage celebrated by ordering new shoes for each resident at Valador. Director Michelle would like to say a few words. Director? The camera panned slightly to the left to reveal an older woman with short, gray-brown hair and wrinkles around her face and decorating her hands. Thank you, dear. I just want to say thank you to whoever did this. We've been struggling these past few months, and we are blessed to receive such a generous gift. A small smile played across Adelaide's lips. It vanished before Varun could see it. It's strange, Varun started. A break-in at Import's bank last night, and a donation to an orphanage the next morning. This city never ceases to amaze me. He shook his head, smiling down at his wife, who tucked her face into his chest. That evening passed uneventfully. Regardless, Adelaide continued to grow uneasy, suspicious of the calm day. It continued into the week. By Tuesday morning, the police still had no new leads about the shooter. Varun gave a speech about the new healthcare initiative his council were working on putting to vote. Otherwise, the city stayed relatively pacified. The only thing worth mentioning on the news told the story of some playboy coming back into town after studying abroad for 2 years. Nicholas Radian, someone Adelaide distrusted and liked to keep on her radar, hadn't done anything to warrant concern publicly so far. In contrast, Adelaide detested his father, Edgar Radian. As far as she was concerned, Edgar was a manipulative businessman who could worm his way out of anything by putting pressure on the right people. He'd only tried to put that pressure on Adelaide once, and she had revealed in return her own knowledge of some sensitive activities the man had been involved in, putting them at an impasse. and beginning the tentative understanding they had. He had been discovered to be the notorious villain called Blunder and publicly arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced to life imprisonment with no chance of parole shortly after their arrangement had been established, around the time Nick had left the city 2 years ago. With that type, she thought cynically to herself, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Wednesday afternoon at 2:45, Adelaide excused herself from the office, telling Gina at the front counter that she would be out of the office for a few hours. She walked the short distance to the main office of Decidian Daily, the newspaper company, and was greeted in a flurry by a receptionist who walked her quickly to Paul's office. The tiny, cluttered cubicle housed file cabinets and crappy coffee. It smelled of cedarwood and sterile something that Adelaide couldn't quite place. The bouncing golden curls of the tall, lanky man who had arranged this meeting caught her eye. She sat in the folding plastic chair opposite the desk in the cubicle space as Paul rushed around the corner, clenching a book and a file under his arm with 2 sloshing, steaming cups of coffee in his hands. Rounding the corner, he handed her a cup, catching his breath and carelessly laying the book on the already precarious stack on the file cabinet. "I'm so sorry I'm late," he said, taking his seat, cringing as the coffee he carried sloshed onto his arm. He thumbed through the papers on the desk before him, pulling out a yellow legal pad of paper, searching for a pen for a moment before pausing to remove it from a hidden place in his hair, or possibly behind his ear. Adelaide chuckled, watching the journalist in his natural habitat. When he approached her in public, he was always so composed, ready with a notepad and a list of unexpected questions. Now, it seemed she had caught him off guard somehow. "You're actually still on time," she assured him, glancing at the watch on her wrist. "I'm early." He smiled, tucking his unruly hair behind his ear and scribbling something down on the notepad. "In that case, I don't want to waste your time, so if it's alright with you, I'd like to jump right in." "Works for me." Adelaide tentatively put the cup of coffee to her lips and slurped. It was awful, but she sipped it nonetheless. "Alright, perfect. So I know you've talked about your relationship with the mayor before, but I want to ask you about it anyway." He tucked his hair back again, clearing his throat and meeting her gaze tentatively before he continued. "How did you meet, and how long did it take before you started dating?" Adelaide grinned. She had indeed told the story several times, but it was one of her favorite memories. "I met him with a group of friends. Something like 3.5 years ago. I wasn't looking for anyone to date then, just enjoying the people around me. I had just started this new job working as a project manager for a landscaping company that didn't last. Some of my coworkers heard I was single. I was new in town and found myself without local friends, so they sort of pestered me until I agreed to come out drinking with them." Her smile softened to something warmer, remembering how they had neglected to tell her that they wanted her to meet this friend of theirs. "He walked in, and I saw him in the doorway before I even knew that he would be joining us. I whispered to my friend next to me, 'Look at this hot shot.' And she just laughed. And then he walked over. And that's how we met." Paul stared at her with unexpected intensity. "What did he say to you?" His hand still worked away, quickly scribbling her words onto the page. "Not a thing. I think he thought the same thing about me." "He didn't say a single word?" "Have you two ever talked about that day?" Paul asked incredulously. "No, I mean he introduced himself and shook my hand, but he stayed across the table from me and talked with the rest of my friends." "You know, I haven't thought to ask what he thought." "I suppose that threw you for a loop?" he pried. "Actually, I think that was to be expected. We were and still are 2 people who are complete on our own, who don't need each other. When we finally did talk, I was captivated, and so was he. I found myself listening carefully to his stories, and when he spoke, he brought the words to life in front of me. He's got a way of telling stories so that you feel like you were there with him. And he asks good questions, like you do. When you tell him about yourself, you could be saying something simple, but the way he leans in, you know he's hearing every word like it could bring life. He would catch the little details, you know? The things you didn't say but maybe started to think. He could tell somehow." Adelaide sipped her coffee again absently, remembering the early days. "So you dated immediately?" No, we saw each other several times just as friends in the group setting before I gave him my number. Paul continued to scribble away on his notepad, turning the page. Oh, so you initiated. I guess, but I think he planned it. I think he knew he could get me to give him my number. Tell me more about that. Her cheeks warmed, her fingers drumming the little styrofoam cup. No, I think I'll keep that story to myself. She grinned up at Paul's disappointed frown. Her thoughts shifted back to that night, 2 months after they'd met. She hadn't seen him in a week and found herself checking her phone frequently for texts from their mutual friends, telling of the next hangout. Eventually, Varun himself planned a bowling night, confessing that he had been also craving her company. Okay then, keep your secrets. What was it that won you over? What qualities does our fine mayor possess that kept your gaze? I felt comfortable with him. He wanted me around, but I didn't have to entertain him. He sought me out, but wasn't destroyed by my rejection when I had to turn him down for this reason or that. I felt wanted, sought after, and interesting. And he was just as captivating to me as I seemed to be to him. The warmth grew, and she resisted covering her mouth with her hand to hide her smile. Things with Varun were obviously personal. She hadn't meant to say that much. Paul perceived her discomfort and graciously changed the subject. So, let's talk about the recent tax at Kratos Incorporated. Can you tell me how you're dealing with all this chaos? Adelae recognized that he had trapped her, switching topics from one personal thing to such a delicate matter. If she told him what she had decided that Adelae Newman felt about the attacks, she could easily be painted as weak and afraid, and even paranoid by the media. If she spoke with confidence as CEO and with trust in the police forces, she risked moving into the light of not taking things seriously and putting lives at risk. She liked talking to Paul, but she didn't know yet if she could trust him to portray her well, or if he would take her words and spin them like the media was known to do. She had only agreed to this interview with him because out of all the reporters she had met, he seemed the most capable of digging for truth while still being aware of the impact and power of his position by the tales he could spin. It was a flaw that led to his work being published less frequently, but the things that he did publish were honest and well regarded by most. You know, Paul, I like you. Can I trust you to represent me well? Paul held her eye contact for a long moment. Somehow he seemed to read between the lines, to see something that maybe she was actually offering. His mouth opened and closed several times before he spoke. You can trust me. Adelae nodded slowly. Something about the way that his eyes opened wider when she asked the question caused her to pause. Okay. If I'm being honest, which I intend to be, she chose her words carefully, I myself am a little rattled by the whole situation. It seems random, unpredictable, and unprecedented. If I were asked what I think we need to do, I would tell you that I have every confidence that the police have got this investigation under control. The words came out easier as she continued. But that doesn't answer what we as the community can do. And what would you say the answer to that is? I think we can keep ourselves informed. And that in times of chaos like the city has seen before, we have choices to make about who we want to be. I think we have the opportunity to choose courage over comfort, and we can choose to come together with our loved ones and neighbors instead of looking each to our own concerns, which would be the easy choice. I think we can be brave, and we can choose not to bend to fear. She finished with a little nod to her interviewer. A long moment of silence passed. Wow, Paul responded finally. Would you say the same thing about the threat this city faces with the villains who control the area? They've been here, relatively unchecked, for a long time. The police just do damage control at this point. Breathe, she reminded herself quietly. This wasn't the first time she'd been caught in this position. How many times had she or Varun faced this topic? She'd grown in her ability to maintain her composure, however, the actual response took a while to form. You know, Paul, that's a difficult topic to address. I would say being brave is always the better choice. Paul gave a wry little grin. Mrs. Newman, you've given me an answer without giving me an answer. Adelae smiled knowingly. This may be one of those topics to which I can't speak. Any answer I give is both the right and the wrong one. I represent too many people to truly speak to the concerns. Paul nodded without meeting her eyes, making some little notes. His pen thudded dully against the paper. He stared at the object, chewing his lower lip, before decidedly setting the paper on the desk and facing her again, folding his hands in front of himself. "Can I tell you what I think?" he asked slowly. Adelai's heart skipped a beat. "Of course, please do." He took a deep breath and leaned in a bit, speaking quietly to her. "I think that the villains, as we call them, are not nearly as much of a threat as people have painted them to be." He glanced around, watching someone walk by and waiting until they were out of earshot to continue. "If anything, every city has crime. And these individuals are keeping it so well managed and have been fine-tuning themselves and their skills for so long that some would say that they don't need to be stopped. When's the last time you heard about someone overdosing? The pharmacist stops drug smuggling, making sure his narcotics are regulated. There may still be a drug problem in this city, but between him and the marshal, our city is listed at the top 5 for lowest numbers of homelessness. Have you seen gang wars or shootings? They don't happen thanks to that militia group. And theft? I guess there's still some petty theft, but for the most part, Lady Shade cleans up around here. They might be committing crimes, but I don't think they're nearly as evil as people have painted them to be." Adelaide leaned in, smirking. "Paul, that's something people don't say out loud." "And why not? Why do they stay villains? What's the point?" She considered his words for a moment. She'd heard the question several times, but it wasn't as simple as the way he painted it. "What would you say is the point of heroes?" He picked up the pen again and began to twirl it between his fingers. "Usually to stop threats, to stop criminals." "Okay, and what's their personal goal? What do they strive for?" "For justice, to help people." She nodded slowly. "And what would you say is the goal of these criminals, villains?" "Well, when people make movies about them, they have some polluted ideas about how the world should work, and they try to make it happen. Sometimes they have a power complex, or they do it for revenge." "And who initiates these conflicts?" "Well, usually the villains." "And do they always just cause chaos?" "Well, no," Paul said, as though it were obvious before realizing the question was rhetorical. A slow grin crept across her lips again. "I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if we demonize people who are just going for their goals. They're powerful and sometimes do apparently terrible things. I think it's foolish to underestimate them. They're capable of greatness." She swirled the cup in her hand, choosing her words carefully. If a hero's only goals are to stop a villain, who has more work laid out for them? I think these individuals are incredibly clever. I think they're human. They want something, and so they're working towards some sort of goal. Is that a good reason to fault them? Their means are not entirely safe, no one doubts that, but their results? Paul scribbled away for a moment, then reread his notes, tapping the end of his pen on his thigh. "Mrs. Newman, it almost seems like you support these criminals. Is that the position you take on the matter?" Adelaide smiled again. "Why, Mr. Eggerston, what kind of woman do you think I am?" That's the end of chapter 2. What do you think? How much does Paul really know? He seemed kind of mischievously good at asking questions. Did Adelaide give away too much? What's gonna happen next? Who's trying to kill her? That's not even asked right now. I mean, I guess the police are investigating it. Anyway, if you liked this chapter and you want to hear more, the next chapter is called Hotel Lancaster, and that would be chapter 3, releasing on December 9th. Tune in next week for the short stories segments to continue. I think it's the first week of December. I think I'll try to be Christmassy. Is it too early? Holiday colors, Red's my favorite color, so it's really easy for me to don a red outfit. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for showing up. If you enjoy my content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button below, and then you get notified when I notify you. Again, next video will be the first Wednesday of December, and there are 5 weeks in December, which is so exciting because, do you know why? Do you know why? Because the 5th December, because the 5th Wednesday of every month, when there is a 5th Wednesday, is the fun week, which means that we're doing something that is not on the agenda yet. I mean, I know what we're doing, but it's not D&D talks, short stories, or book chapters, so that's gonna be cool. Stay tuned for that. Again, thank you for showing up. Thank you to my subscribers for sticking around, and I will see you next week. Is it noisy? I feel like I should close the window, but I don't really want to get up. I feel like rolling up your sleeves is a thing you do when you're cool and you wear t-shirts. This is dorky. Nope, that doesn't look any better. Maybe a little bit. I can't just do one. Fuck, I put pizza in the oven half an hour ago. Okay, that was scary. It was blackened, but not smoking. Don't feel like that's a big success, but didn't set my kitchen on fire. He smiled, tucking his... We have choices to make about who... Thanks, Car. The pharmacist stops drug smuggling. Stop it! I should have closed the window.